struck by is how the plot is motored by questions. It's Dante's questions, and heaven is so filled with lovers that basic rule of love that you try to satisfy the desire of the lover means that every question that he urgently wants answered, he's going to have a very long presentation given to him by these visitors that make their way from the Empyrean to these different spheres of the astral world. And before he even has to ask, because they all read his mind. In the beatific vision, the interiority of Dante the pilgrim is exposed to their sight, and they're able to meet that great desire that lovers have to satisfy. So that's what we get, and we have right off the bat that painful discussion about moon spots, but we're going to find that that's worth working through, because a principle that we meet again and again in these first cantos is that we must try to understand how a single unitary source can refract itself into ordered diversity. And getting that right is essential for understanding, for instance, poetic practice. If it is not the case that difference is something that is good, then the poetic vocation isn't going to be tied to anything substantial. The poet seeks to represent the refractions of the unitary light. And so over and over again, we get these discussions of how the creator both creates directly and then indirectly through the ministry of angels and through the influence of the stars. And that's something that's it's very clear that Dante does believe in astrological influence. It's always balanced with at least the statement of the affirmation of free will as a reality. But he does believe, certainly we would take it as the fact that there are subrational factors that determine human personality or that shape it. But he does really believe that astrological influence is real. That's partly because of the cosmological views of the time, which had the stars being directly created by God. So there's, in the class of things that God directly creates, are angels, the human soul, the heavenly bodies, which are made of a kind of matter according to that worldview. They're made of incorruptible matter, and they are, just like angels and human souls, sempiternal. They start at creation and they never pass away. And then the other thing that's created directly by God is prime matter. Everything else gets created indirectly by God. He uses the angelic and the astral mediation to create a world that is variegated, that has ordered hierarchy. Hierarchy means ordered difference. You have the question about why is it the case that fathers often have bad sons, and or logically vice versa. Generational difference. Any kind of difference you can think of, Dante wants to try to account for in terms of this basic cosmology. So we're going to have to deal with that. I think we are still in the thick of the question I've been raising about how much the primal will for the primal good can actually be, can miss its mark eternally. I think that's a question that gets raised again and again here. I definitely want to look at that. So the first thing is to note that the eros of questioning, that desire, the desire to know, the drive to know the cause of all things, to get to the root of things, to know more clearly and to know more systematically, and to know all things in relation to all things, to have a wise vision of the whole. that's what Dante is driven by, and that somehow is very erotic in the celestial paradise. And his guide here for this erotic quest is his first love, Beatrice. So I want to note a few things about his training. It seems, and again, none of this is secure, but it seems that after the death of Beatrice in 1290, when they were both around 25, Dante dealt with that by embarking on a very serious course of study in philosophy and theology. So he probably went to 3 institutions in Florence, Santa Croce, which was a Franciscan, and would have had both conventual and spiritual influences. So that the influence of Bonaventure is there quite clearly. But of course, the figure that dominates the middle, the last few cantos that we had here is Thomas Aquinas. And at Santa Maria Novella, that was a Dominican institution. He would have had training in that Dominican thought, which is basically his, I mean, we'll see where he deviates from the Dominican Thomist line, but that is going to set a baseline. Whatever he does to innovate, he's going to innovate off of that baseline. And he did side with the Dominicans against certain very important Franciscan principles, such as the question of seminal reasons, the question of body and soul as 2 substances, the question of the question of the souls, the vegetative, the sensitive, and the rational soul is either being 3 or 1. He's definitely committed to the Dominican unitary soul. He did probably get taught by Remigio de Girolami in Santa Maria Novella, who was a Republican, little r Republican. So we had this very, very good discussion on Monday about the possible republicanism of Dante, and I do believe that he was, though committed to the imperial idea, at heart a Republican, and that would bring up an interesting parallel, I think, to Machiavelli, who would show up later in Florence. And then the final institution that he probably was influenced by is Santo Spirito, which was the Augustinian church. And Augustine has been a constant presence, even if he isn't a character that is met along the way. The Confessions clearly structure much of this new spiritual autobiography that Dante is presenting of himself. So those are some basic thoughts to tell you that Dante was very deep into the most current debates, and he does indicate some positions that he's taking, especially here in this canticle. Okay, those are some basic things, and then if James can put up the map of the celestial paradise, I would like to indicate something about the structure of the thing. So we have 9 celestial spheres. They're the 7 planetary or bodies that are surrounding the Earth, and the notion is the Earth is at the center, not because Earth is special, but because Earth is lowest. It is really an egregious kind of misunderstanding of medieval thought to think that putting the Earth at the center means some prideful move. It was just a thought that, well, first it matched what you could just see with your eyes, the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, but it's also combined with the notion that it's the dregs of the universe, that the heavy things fall. And of course, for Dante, that's heightened by putting Satan at the very center of the universe, right? He's stuck there at the center. So Earth is, and of course they knew Earth is round. I mean, that, again, these kind of silly things, thinking that medievals thought Earth is flat. That's not the case. So you've got the round Earth at the center, and then you've got 7 celestial spheres. You've got the moon, and that's where you have the initial discussion about hierarchy, and that is ordered difference. and how that could be a good thing. And again, that's going to be something that we have to grapple with, not only because it's important for Dante, but also because it's kind of a scandal for the modern sensibility. Then you have the heaven or the sphere of Mercury, and then the sphere of Venus, and those three are going to paradoxically show us, in a way, defective versions of the theological virtues. Again, the canticle that shows us the clearest structure is Purgatory by far. Hell is very messy, and Paradiso is a little messy too. Those who show up in the moon have some kind of defective faith. They broke vows one way or another. Those who show up in Mercury have defective hope. They sought fame and glory, earthly fame and glory. And those who show up in Venus obviously have defective charity. They were too erotic in a kind of earthly way. The other thing to know about the mechanics of Paradiso is that all of the souls reside in the great celestial rows, which we'll come upon at the end of the whole Commedia, and they descend into each sphere, the sphere that is appropriate to their level, their hierarchical arrangement in the rows, to meet the pilgrim. They meet the pilgrim because they are thrilled to kind of communicate with a new soul. They're lovers who love to see someone new. And so they come down from the Empyrean and do the interviews, as it were, with the pilgrim. The Empyrean is not one of the 9 spheres. It is the place where God is. That is, it's a place without a place. It's a time. It's the divine realm in its purity. And then you've got the 9 spheres below it. So you've got the 7. When we talk about there's the old phrase, I'm in 7th heaven. Well, that would get us to the farthest heaven filled with a planet, right? And that would be Saturn. So we're going to see after the first 3, we get to the sun. Obviously, that's where all of the great, especially monastic, well, you've got the Dominicans and the Franciscans, especially there. Next, we ended this reading with the arrival of Beatrice and the pilgrim in Mars. We'll go to Jupiter and then Saturn. Saturn was as far as they could see, as far as the planets that we call planets. And then beyond that is the starry, it's the zodiac, it's the sphere that contains all of the background stars, the fixed stars, the stellatum. And then beyond that is the primum mobile, that is the sphere that moves all the other spheres. There are 9 spheres then. The angels are ranked in 9 orders, and they're in the Empyrean, but they also manage the 9 spheres. That is, each rank of angels has assigned to it one of the 9 celestial spheres. So that's important because, again, the angelic and the astral are both essential in creating the difference that makes this world so abundant and gives the poet something to do. So I think that's a good overview of that, I hope. And then I want to just note a few things about that very hard dialogue, and it kind of puts us on notice as to what we're going to deal with in this canticle. The Moonspot Discourse by Beatrice. It can seem perverse because there's all of this talk, and of course we know that this isn't technically correct. It's not because well, however we parse the answer, right? That in fact, in a way, Beatrice's answer is, you can do all the physics you want, but the metaphysical quality of the heavens is what you need to really get in mind first. And that's what she's going to say, that the moon has variation in its luminescence because of the fact that in the ordered creation, the principles of the secondary creation, that is the angels, create difference, and it's a good thing. So, and that will have the name we know, hierarchy. And we're going to find out, we'll have that, one of the first questions is, well, Picarda, are you unhappy being, it seems, lower than so many others? And then her answer, of course, is no. And we have that beautiful line about, we'll save to the discussion as to why she's not unhappy. So the long and arduous process that we have to go through with Beatrice in that doesn't end, because we get the same discussion repeated a couple of times with variations. One of the other things I want to note before we get into the text together, in the in Canto 6, we have that magnificent speech by Justinian, and as Hollander notes, it really is a theologized Aeneid. It's a way of thinking about the spiritual importance of Rome for Dante. It covers an immense amount of history. Dozens of names show up. And of course, this correlates to the Canto 6 of the previous canticles in that it's political. You had Chaco talking about Florence in Inferno 6. You have Mark. He was talking about Italy. Yeah, Marco Lombardo, I think, talking about Italy and how factionalized it is. And then we have the empire, which is the great horizon of Dante's political thought. The hope for unity on earth is in the notion of Rome and an empire and a papacy that work together. So we'll be enlightened by looking at that. It's the longest speech in the Commedia, even though we get a lot of Aquinas as we move on, right? Aquinas talks about, when we move to the sphere of the sun, we have Aquinas talking about giving the life of St. Francis, and then Bonaventure trades off and gives us the life of St. Dominic, and it's in a way that's a utopian kind of gesture, because of course, as in our own day, the school fights between Dominicans and Franciscans are very real. In the 13th century, when the mendicants arose, when St. Francis especially, but also St. Dominic, and they're named together, right, in the Litany of the Saints for a reason. Like Peter and Paul, Dominic and Francis were thought of as giving us something foundational. And it was especially the first stigmatic, the first person we have recorded as receiving the wounds of Christ is St. Francis. And he seemed to represent a new beginning for the church. And St. Dominic was thought of in the same kind of mode. It was the emphasis was on urban life and converting the new cities that were starting to really become vital again after a long period of inanition, because urban life was really a Roman Empire phenomenon and had gone away with had waned and then basically collapsed as the centuries rolled on. A lot of that was a demographic collapse. So as population started to increase again, going into the 13th century, you had cities again, you had commerce again, you had currency and trade again. And so to meet that need, you had the rise of the mendicant orders, who were urban, and they were there to preach a new way of life in contrast to the worldly, the money grubbing or other just ways of being human that weren't not sufficiently aware of our final goal. And so those two, St. Francis and St. Dominic, put on the table a radical renewal of the church. But as with any institution, it's very difficult to keep the purity of that flame. And Bonaventure himself would become Minister General of the Franciscan Order. He would have to deal with very practical matters, and he would have to deal with the split between what we call the conventuals and the spirituals. And one of those great gestures Dante has is the spiritual patron of the spiritual Franciscans was this Calabrian mystic named Saint Joachim of Fiore, and he's holding hands with Saint Joachim, not Saint Joachim, sorry. He's holding hands with Joachim in that circle of 12 that Bonaventure belongs to in the sphere of the sun, while Aquinas is holding the hand of Siger of Brabant, an Averroist who was mightily attacked by Aquinas, and I think we have to think about why Siger is put there. But the great theme, and I want to end with this, the great theme that that Dante leaves us with in the cantos that we end up with today is of reconciliation, that the old battles on earth, the old polemics, the old controversies, they don't matter in the light of eternity. And what does matter is this overwhelming love. And in a way, as noted in some of the commentaries, the sphere of the sun is even more erotic in some deep sense than the sphere of Venus. And we'll want to think about that. So I would read the questions here just to, again, be good if you have these questions as your own, but of course if you have others that more spontaneously arose, that'd be great too. Number one, how does continued recourse to classical illusions in Paradiso challenge our assumptions? Number two, the notion of hierarchy vexes modern sensibilities. What is our reaction to the strong defense of hierarchical difference? Does difference require order? Number three, what more do we learn about desire and freedom of the will after the encounters on the moon? Number four, we have a final canto 6, again, focus on politics. How does it relate to the corresponding cantos, the previous canticles? And number five, what's the point of having Aquinas relate the life of Francis and Bonaventure the life of Dominic? I'm going to answer the last two. But, all right.